I was always well aware of the games for the Sega Saturn in the US and Japan. I followed these two markets closely, and rarely did anything get past me that I didn't know about. This was not the case when it came to the European releases. My only connection to this market was the odd magazine I would buy from Barnes & Nobles that covered the UK market. This was so seldom, however, it provided little in the way of a comprehensive look at the region. It wasn't until the latter half of the 1990s that I gained access to the internet and therefore began to really see the games that Europe received. While most of its games were released in the US and Japan in one form or another, the PAL region did have some exclusives that no other region ever saw. In this episode, we will be looking at the 10 games that were only released in Europe for the Sega Saturn. They range from a few sports offerings to even some adventure games. Some were outstanding, some not so much. Let's take a look at PAL exclusive Sega Saturn games. Released in mid-1998, Atlantis: The Lost Tales is a point-and-click adventure game developed by Cryo Interactive, the studio responsible for Dune on the Mega CD. You begin the game as one of the Queen's new companions, and of course right from the get-go everything goes to hell. The Queen has been kidnapped, her other companions killed, and the kingdom in complete and total ignorance as to who did it. As the new guy, you stick your nose into the investigation, and off the game goes. Each area is navigated with a pointer that shifts to full motion video sequences from one scene to the next. You get a cool looking 360-degree viewpoint in many of these areas that gives the engine some much needed depth, but otherwise Atlantis here is an ugly game all the way around. The voice acting fares slightly better, but is still well below what was considered even decent in that era. The biggest problem this has is navigating yourself around. It takes forever just to get from one place to the next, thanks to every action having a load time associated with it. It bogs down the flow of the story and makes it difficult to enjoy. If you like a good mystery, however, there is a tale here worth following to its conclusion. I didn't have any problems playing it on my Japanese Saturn either. It's compatible with the Shuttle Mouse, and the Saturn version was only published by Sega in European territories.
Why should the consort's men investigate the Queen's disappearance? We're Her Majesty's companions. We have a duty to do something.
What could you do? I saw how you stood up to Mildrance, and now you want to be a hero? You'll stay right here.
Young Seth had failed his first test. As for Queen Rhea, she was never heard of again.
Do you like great animation? Do you enjoy British humor? Do you like point-and-click adventures with lots, and I mean lots of talking? Then late 1997's Discworld 2 might be for you. Developed by Perfect Entertainment, the company that ported many of the PlayStation greats like Wipeout to the Saturn, your mission here is to convince Death to come out of retirement and resume his duties of ferrying souls to the afterlife. Based on the novel set in the fantasy Discworld, you need to explore about, chat, ask questions, and generally progress the story through exposition until the end. That makes this one tough to target an audience for, because if you don't appreciate the humor in these conversations, you will hate this experience to the core. The conversations that carry this humor are long, frequent, and necessary to unfold the game. There is an overworld area where you choose where you want to go, each with a specific environment that must be explored. There are characters everywhere to converse with, and it's here that much of the story will open up. There is some excellent animation in these sequences, and the voice work is simply top-notch in many cases. Again, no issues playing it on the Japanese Saturn, and it's another one where Sega decided to publish it only in European countries, though this one doesn't use the mouse.
So, what is a thome, actually?
A thorn? You want to know exactly what a thorn might be?
Good heavens, no! That's why I asked.
Oh yes, I can tell you all about thorns.
Well?
In 1997, Interplay decided to bring Frankenstein Through the Eyes of the Monster to the Saturn in Europe. It's yet another point-and-click adventure, this time told through the experience as the famous monster himself. Convicted of a heinous crime and put to death, you are brought back to life by the Mad Doctor and embark on a journey to find out exactly what happened to you. You'll need to explore, find out what the Doc is up to, and hopefully foil any plans to your detriment. This one is pure point-and-click frivolity. The story is silly, the performances are silly, and the gameplay is little more than clicking still images to find new items and conversations. Tim Curry stars as the Mad Doctor, and while aptly crazy sounding, I feel his performance is well below his usual skills. There are multiple endings here for those that enjoy such things, and it played well on my Japanese Saturn, but I can't recommend something that looks and plays like it belongs on the Sega CD. It was 1997, and the Saturn library had far better adventures to be had.
I have a theory. No, it is more. Energy moves, it flows like waves, mixing, shaping, affecting matter. Visible light is a particular energy wave, as is sound, electricity, and heat. Ergo, life itself is also an energy wave, a specific vibration. It is that simple.
In mid-1997, Sega published the Manic Media created and Euro exclusive Formula Kart Special Edition. As the name suggests, this go-kart racer isn't your typical comical entry into the genre. You won't be throwing any turtle shells here, and instead will face either ruthless AI opponents or play a friend in split-screen action. This tries to be a very serious racing game, and it's actually quite difficult to win. You get 8 tracks, as well as a few different play modes to challenge your skills. The visuals aren't bad here, surprisingly. The frame rate is mostly stable and the polygon draw distance is respectable. You will notice at the bottom of the screen the additional lines of resolution are chopped off via my Japanese Saturn, affecting the gauges. This isn't a deal breaker and the game can still be enjoyed without a lot of other issues. Honestly, it's enjoyable to see a game like this try and be a serious racing game. It's fast, hectic, and the CPU is always just a turn away from defeating you. The tracks are small enough that you can stay competitive even after a big wreck. Sega Rally has nothing to fear from this one, but I still think this one has more appeal than most in the genre. In the first half of 1997, Rage Software and Codemasters got together to release Jonah Lomu Rugby for the Saturn. I'd like to first say that I am no expert on the sport. I understand the basics, but am far from a scholar on the intricacies. I can tell you that it runs nice and fast, and everything is easily recognizable on the screen. The AI absolutely destroyed me no matter what I tried. I mean, it was incredibly aggressive and simply would not be denied a score. My pathetic defensive skills here were simply no match. I had no issues that I could tell on my Japanese Saturn, so if Rugby is your game, it may be worth a look.
Going in well. I can't see the ball in there. That was tremendous driving.
This one was a surprise. Released in April of 1997, this core design joint actually has a decent setup to be a great game. You and your sister have been trapped in the dream world by the diabolical Swagman, and must find items and solve puzzles in this top-down world to find your way out. It's held back by some frustrating design elements that make it really difficult to play at first. Often you are never really told what your mission is. You just kinda wander around until you figure it out. Enemies tend to be infuriating, particularly the ones you can't kill that inhabit tight spaces. The exploration element is excellent and by far the game's greatest strength. The pre-rendered sprites and backdrops aren't the best, but not an eyesore either, and the challenge is definitely there for long-term play. This will quickly overwhelm and turn off many of you, but for those with more patience, this is definitely one of the better PAL exclusives on the Saturn. In 1997, Rage Software was also responsible for the dumpster fire that is Trash It. Published by GT Interactive, this action game has you making a mess with your hammer and then having to clean it up with your vacuum cleaner. The stages work in a side-scrolling manner, with you breaking blocks and other items and then cleaning them up. Sometimes rats come out and need killing or cleaning up as well. And there is your game. That's all you freaking do. Break junk and clean it up. I guess this wouldn't be so bad if it played well, but it can't even get that part right. Instead of having a button for each of your hammer and vacuum movements, you actually need to put them away before you can use one or the other and jump. The Saturn had plenty of buttons for these actions on the damn controller, yet I need to stop in the middle of gameplay, which has a timer if you can believe it, just to switch actions and items. On top of this mystifying gameplay choice, you also get quite possibly the worst Saturn graphics this side of Virtual Highlight and Death Crimson. These pre-rendered characters and items look just terrible, and is the final nail in the coffin of this pitiful effort. I genuinely thought that Rage Software and GT Interactive had done Saturn owners the greatest injustice ever with their port of Doom, but after playing this, I realized Doom was a blessing. It's aptly named, my friends, and I recommend you go absolutely nowhere near it. In mid-1996, Gremlin Interactive developed the Sega-published UEFA Euro 96 England. This game of football plays decent enough, and I had a pretty fun time with it. The action is right in your face, and while the players themselves aren't anything particularly gorgeous, it runs well most of the time. It was actually released under the Sega Sports banner, and is based on Actua Soccer with additional modes and teams. It supports 4-player simultaneous play with the Saturn 6-player adapter, and played just fine on my Japanese unit.
McManaman. Shearer! Oh, he climbed so well and placed it really neatly past the goalkeeper.
In mid-1998, the Saturn received one of its best soccer games, World League Soccer 98. I love the way this looks. It has tons of little touches like shadows and weather effects, and it always runs smooth. It has a few hundred teams to choose from, as well as many stadiums to play in. The editor allows you to create any player you want, and there are tournament and custom leagues to keep you busy. I prefer my football to be of the pigskin variety, but you have to recognize a good soccer game when you see one. This does suffer from the field positioning grid being cut off at the bottom of the screen, unfortunately, handicapping you a bit, but nothing you won't overcome with a bit of practice. Z, or Zed, is a real-time strategy game that was published by GT Interactive in April of 1998. It supports the shuttle mouse and follows along very similar to other games in the genre like Command & Conquer. There are a series of grids on the map that you must take over until you are knocking on the door of your enemy's main base. Destroy that base and the stage is over. You have factories that can make robots, vehicles, and gun placements to defend or attack. It's pretty simple compared to the better games of the genre, lacking any real resource collecting, but it does play well enough with a controller. The graphics are nothing a 16-bit system couldn't have done, however, a disappointment for 2D on the Saturn. It was originally done by the Bitmap Brothers, a popular Amiga developer, of which this was their only Sega Saturn effort. Make sure you understand the quick commands because the AI will show you no quarter as a newbie, and I've had entire units wiped out because they weren't set to defend themselves. No issues running it on the Japanese Saturn at all.
They're beating you. We're under attack. Help! Help!
As I look over my gameplay here of these Euro exclusive Saturn games, I can confidently tell you that while a handful of them were good games, you haven't missed out on anything life-changing. I do recommend you burn yourself a copy of stuff like Discworld 2 and Formula Karts to give them a chance. And if you are all about those point-and-click adventures, Atlantis and Frankenstein may appeal as well. As I do not collect PAL games, you can imagine my utter shock and surprise when I looked up the values of some of these games. They are expensive, and I mean the type of expensive that is well above their worth. Even stuff like Trash It was more than I expected. That means collecting this exclusive batch is going to end up costing you a pretty penny. My favorite here was definitely Formula Kart Special Edition. It's easy to get into and the gameplay only takes a few races to get the hang of. I highly recommend you give it a go. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.